All right, let's get started here. And we know folks will continue to join us here as we get going, but we have a lot to cover in our discussion today. So we want to make sure that we get to it. Thank you all for being here for Reimagining K-12, the future of career connected learning. It's going to be a great panel here today. And as you can tell by the title, you're going to hear a lot about how career connected learning and that new evolution of career and technical education is so foundational to everything happening in K-12. So we have a great group to talk about that. Let's introduce our panelists. So we have our moderator today, Jamie Candee. Jamie is the president and CEO of Edmentum. Jamie was recently named to Caliber One's list of the top 25 women in US PE-backed software. She is an ASU GSV Power of Women Award winner and an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Heartland Award winner, among other recognitions. We have our first panelist, Deb Delisle. Deb was the Assistant Secretary of Education, Elementary and Secondary Education from 2012 to 2015. She also was Ohio's 35th State Superintendent of Public Instruction and the Superintendent of the Cleveland Heights University Heights School District, among other roles. Donald Fennoy II. Donald was the superintendent of the school district of Palm Beach County, the 10th largest district in the nation. Prior to that, he was the COO in the district, and he has served in a variety of other roles, including as a senior area superintendent in Fulton County schools in Georgia, as principal of a CTE high school in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Tim Taylor. Tim is the co-founder and president of America Succeeds, and he leads with a belief in education's power to transform life trajectories and economic mobility. Prior to America Succeeds, he was the founding president of Colorado Succeeds, and he also is the founder of the nonprofit Open Fairways. So I'm sure you all heard enough from me now. So before we take up any more time, I'm going to hand it off to Jamie, and she can get this conversation started.
All right, Ross, thank you so much. And hey, everybody, we are so happy to be with you today. First and foremost, I just want to thank our amazing panelists joining us today. Deb, Donald, and Tim are very, very close advisors and friends to Edmentum. Many of you know them and of their work, and I am delighted to have them here today to be able to talk to you all about the trends, their thoughts, what works, what they're seeing evolve as it relates to career-connected learning here in the United States. And so I always want to start this discussion just from a personal note. As we think about career-connected learning, for me, I grew up with a family who very hard workers. My mom got her certification in cosmetology, and my father was a boiler operator for hospitals for all of his career. And so education was very important to us as a family, but they took very specific pathways in their careers, and they were able to provide for my brother and me. And I chose a specific path in education. But one of the things that I am delighted about as we start this conversation is, for decades, we've talked about college readiness, and career was always part of that. We would say college and career readiness. But from a policy perspective, from a thought leadership, practice application perspective, I think we are still trying to figure out what we really meant by and career readiness, and especially as it relates to K-12. And so we're starting to see some pretty significant movement. And last year in 2024, there were 40 states that passed over 150 pieces of legislation and policy related to how we bring more accessibility, career readiness, durable skills into the K-12 environment. And that is like a significant shift. It's many, many more than we've seen in prior years. And so our esteemed panelists today are going to talk about, from their perspective, what they're seeing and some of the practical applications. So what's happening right now that we should all be very excited about? What do we still have to figure out? Tim Taylor is going to talk to us about how do we actually integrate durable skills into this conversation. So it's going to be a great discussion. So let's get started. We'll try to make this very lively, not just a back and forth Q&A, because we know everybody wants to hear different perspectives. And so we'll try to incorporate that into the conversation. So I want to start with Deb. So Deb, being at the sort of forefront, and you're working across the country here, and you've got many different partnerships at all levels, federal and state level. I want to start with just talking about, from your perspective, your experience, the conversations that you're in, when state and national leaders are emphasizing the need for CTE as a bigger part of K-12, what are they discussing? Why, when, how? Just give us a sense of, like, we're seeing all this legislation, we're hearing all these different bits and pieces, but what's really happening in these discussions? So why now? What's the discussion, and how should we better understand it?
Sure. And first of all, let me say thank you so much to Jamie for your work and leadership in this area and bringing this conversation to the forefront. I think it's absolutely essential that we have this really robust conversation across the country. When I think about career connected learning, one of the things I think about is that it's just not one class or one pathway, right? But to me, it's an all immersive experience, if you will, that helps kids to think about their careers, and it also connects the employers to potential and even capable students. And it involves various methods. Sometimes we think of it as only CTE work, but I also see it, and as do many people in the country, that it also involves work-based learning as well as career exploration. So when I think about educators, and we always say we're preparing kids for their future, I think of the fact that adults in the system is across and even in communities that our mutual goal and responsibility is really to prepare our youth for their future, not our present, but their future, where they're going to land and what kind of a world they're going to inherit. So when I think about that, the conversations around career connected learning just become really vibrant across the country. And I'm hearing more and more people, parents and family members, community members, businesses talk about this. And one of the really primary pieces about this is that it not only taps into students' interest and their talents and their aspirations, but it also addresses, when you think about it, larger issues such as economic mobility and contributing productively to one's community. So we see a rising demand for post-high school credentials, if you will, in high-paying career fields. So it's more important than ever for young people to develop those real-world skills. And I know Tim's going to talk more about durable skills that open doors for them to succeed and even to access opportunities on their own terms. So we may think of it as CTE as one component of the work, but we can't forget the importance of apprenticeships and internships and other opportunities that engage kids in robust experiences to help them to figure out what is their next phase of life and how can they harness this. And this is not just a high school issue. I'm so glad that you labeled this K through 12, because certainly middle school is so important to this piece about helping kids to figure out who am I, what do I want to do, what encourages me, inspires me, right? And then earlier on than that, early on, we've got to embed not just the durable skills that Tim will discuss, but also how do we get kids to think about their own future and to leave our schools with a great amount of hope that they can have this great future in front of them. So we need to provide opportunities and resources to ensure that all kids can be successful.
Appreciate that, Deb. Thank you. And I think, we're going to come back to this, but as we start to talk about, I think there's not a lot of things in education right now that we could agree on have strong bipartisan support. But this is one of them. And so I want to come back to some
Absolutely.
of the comments that you made there and get the panel talking around why is that and where do we see that bipartisan support. But Tim, I want to turn it over to you. So SU GSV coming up, and I get the great privilege of sitting on a panel where we're going to talk about durable skills at the middle school level, which is going to be a very exciting conversation. But I think I went and looked a couple weeks ago at the agenda, and I think I counted about close to 10 different sessions kind of around anchoring us on what are durable skills, what do they mean, how do we do them. So tell us a little bit about durable skills, the durable skills framework, and how America Succeeds is really leading the country right now in this effort.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for pulling this panel together and for this conversation. So I'll start by if anybody's familiar with America Succeeds, it is most likely because of our work related to durable skills. We popularized the term about 4 years ago, coming out of the pandemic when we were talking to employers. So America Succeeds, we partner with employers on the demand side of what they're looking for young people to be able to know or do to create that economic mobility that Deb just brought up, right? We are obsessed with economic mobility at America Succeeds and creating those pipelines for the mutual benefit of the employers and the young people who are learners who will become earners. And one of the things we kept hearing from employers were there is a set of skills that last a lifetime. You will bring these skills with you from job to job, even if the technical skills will evolve really rapidly and outpace us over the course of our lifetime, or you switch careers, or you move geographies, or you pick up additional credentials or certifications. And so those durable skills, so just for the audience, We define durable skills as how you use what you know, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and then also how you show up in the world, your leadership skills, your metacognition, your growth mindset. And it's those combinations of things that we refer to as durable skills. Some people, you may have heard them called soft skills or 21st century skills. Employers don't love either of those, so durable skills became a preferred term from employers. And what's wonderful is it's being embraced back into the school systems and trying to develop these skills in students so that they're ready for the world. We believe everybody in the history of history was hired for a combination of their technical and durable skills. If you're an engineer or a pilot, we hope you veer towards the technical skills. If you are going into customer service or many of the others, it probably veers towards the durable skills. But there's a combination in everything. There are no longer jobs where you just don't need these. Our partners in developing the framework was CompTIA, the Computer Technology Industry Association, and those were folks who used to be able to code and not really have interaction with other folks in the company or clients or facing forward. And now that's just not the case anymore. So they were really pivotal in helping us develop our framework, which can help put these skills into the teaching and learning of these skills in school. And what does that look like in the classroom, and how early can you begin, right? So this is not like a welding or a manufacturing class, right? You can start practicing durable skills in first grade. And that's really how a lot of us have developed these over the course of our lifetime. And they are just so critical to developing that economic mobility. They're the second rung on the career ladder. There are no jobs that will provide the lifestyle that we want to create for young people and the jobs of the future unless they develop these skills. So I really look forward to digging into some of what we've been doing on this. And I will say, just to sort of also share, there's some things happening that are putting some wind in our sails. So many people are probably familiar with portraits of a graduate, right? You can't bring a portrait of a graduate to life without durable skills. Every portrait we've ever seen starts with the table stakes, reading, writing, arithmetic, but they immediately jump to critical thinking, collaboration, communication. And unless we transform what's happening in the classroom, nobody's ever going to look like these portraits that we're developing. And so bringing those to life is a big part of how durable skills weave into this conversation.
That's great, Tim. And we're going to come back to that when we talk about how teachers can be equipped. A couple of months ago, when we were previewing our middle school CTE courses, where we integrated durable skills into those actual courses, into the rubric, the curriculum, and we were sharing it and getting feedback from the middle school teachers that we partner with across the country. And one of the things I heard them say, one of the themes was, we've all, as great teachers, tried to, what we used to call soft skills, we've tried to build these into our daily instruction, but you have to think about it, because it hasn't been, it hasn't been in the standards, it hasn't been part of our sort of core academic instructional model. And now we're trying to figure out how to integrate that in a really fulsome way. And so I want to come back to that conversation, and especially have you talk a little bit about what you're seeing out in the field and some of the teacher preparedness programs that I think are going to really help move this forward from a durable skills integration perspective. Donald, over to you. So very successful superintendent at multiple districts. One of the big things that we talked about this when we opened, is this idea of like, how do you actually define and apply college and career readiness? And so from your perspective, when you think about post-secondary readiness and what it takes to actually build these career programs within districts, talk to us a little bit about your perspective on that, your background, some of the accomplishments and things that you have seen over your time as a numerous district leader in terms of really thinking through foundationally how we start to build and implement these types of programs.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Jamie, for having me, and I really appreciate being on the panel with such amazing people. But I think over my career, I'm a military kid. My parents are from Detroit, worked in plants, and my father spent 22 years in the U.S. military. And, you want to talk about career connected learning, and my parents were married at 18. So I essentially grew up with them and watched my dad and my mother grow in their skills as we traveled all over the world and took on different job assignments. So once I got into education, my father joined a program called Troops to Teachers. So he transferred from being a soldier to becoming a teacher. And that's how I got involved in education. And he was very clear that the skills that again, growing up in a military household at times, there are very clear rules, a lot of experiences, a lot of touching things, a lot of experiencing the world. And when I look at some of the gaps that I experienced as an educator, sometimes it was predicated on what kids got to see in the world. And so when I think about my own child, I have a son who's soon to graduate in a year or so, who's very interested in marine biology. And for me, it was kind of like I didn't understand. The only thing I thought the boy was going to do was work in an aquarium somewhere. But then I realized through working with some friends, it's a whole world called aqua agriculture. So now this summer, he's going to go to the University of Miami and start going out to the ocean, watching fish, grow, and how that then populates the public supermarkets. And so that really resonates with me when I think about my time as a high school principal, where we had multiple pathways, medical, IT, we had engineering. We had a very unique partnership with Clemson University around construction management, where our students in those lab spaces would actually build Habitat for Humanity's homes, or they would build sheds that they would then sell, and had to figure out the type of revenue they would need to generate in order to then continue the program moving forward. And I can think about examples in each one of the different content areas. But part of what I think school systems are thinking and doing, what must do, and what we did in Palm Beach and Atlanta and everywhere else I worked, was there has to be a real clear partnership with the business development board of a community, the economic council, really exposing business and industry inside of the school system so that we know where our future job workforce will come from. But also, the hard truth for those of us in public ed is that we're trying to produce kids to participate in a global society. We want them to be global citizens. We want them to be critical thinkers. We want them, but they also have to understand how to interact with other people, as Tim put out there, our durable skills. But part of that reality is that we need business and industry to help us move fast enough with this period of exponential growth. If things are moving so fast, as a school system leader, I don't have the resources to change the curriculum fast enough. So we need outside and third-party partners to help us retool curriculum to meet the needs of the current workforce. And so when you think about, I always talked about I'm a certified auto mechanic, and I also have degrees in education, because that was just a part of, my grandfather used to always say, what you do not know how to do, you have to pay someone to do it for you. And so this idea of learning and touching things and being able to own a home, and how do you fix a light bulb, or if the smoke detector is going off, do you know how to change that battery, right? These are all practical pieces. So when I look at career and technical education programs and career connected learning, it's beyond just the workforce. It's also how do you survive in the world as an adult. I call it adulting to a degree. And so with my own 9-year-old daughter and my own 15-year-old son, there's a lot of adulting going on in the Fennoy home right now. I think as the parents who pay most of the bills, there's certain things we shouldn't have to do, right? Our kids should do some of those things. And I think it's a very practical part of them understanding when someone opens the door, how do you greet them? Again, you wouldn't, for a lot of people, they don't understand post-COVID, a lot of kids have not been exposed to just engaging with other people other through technology. And so sort of that digital literacy, understanding that there is a world out there beyond your computer screen, will also help with their introduction, and when they join the workforce, and understand that some days there are long hours and some days there are short hours, but at the end of the day the job must get done. And I think that's the beauty of the career and technical education space. Not sort of the old school way of looking at it, which is sometimes off-putting to some parents, but I think the sort of new school way of looking at it, which this is just a part of survival in a global society where competition is greater than it's ever been, because every continent now has access to these computers and can see a world, and people are hungry to participate in the workforce, and our students need that advantage as well.
Yeah,
that's right.
Jamie, can I build off of something
Absolutely, Deb.
that was just said? Thanks. I don't know if people have read a recent article in Fortune magazine. I was really intrigued by the fact that many people are reporting out that companies are firing Gen Z grouping of people faster than anything they've ever done before. And it just so relates to what both Tim and Donald were talking about, the kinds of experiences in career-connected learning, CTE classes, etc. Those give opportunities for kids to practice those skills that they need to be successful. And if you read the article in Fortune magazine, it was all about leaders saying that they struggle because I'm going to say these kids, I hate to use that term, but Gen Z on the whole, they're not showing up on time. They're unorganized. They have poor communication skills. They're not working collaboratively to reach a goal within their organization. Those are durable skills, and they're also life skills. I mean, showing up at work at time, wearing the right appropriate attire, being able to say when they struggle and seek out resources. Those are skills that have to be learned, and they have to be practiced early on, right? So from very early on in school. So we have to figure out the right ways to do this. So unless we prepare kids, not just with the knowledge and the content that's needed to go into their chosen career or the role they want to play, but what are all of the other things around it that really help to make somebody successful? And I think it just ties that together so well with what you were saying, Donald, as well as with Tim.
Yes, it really does. So I want to go back to, I want to start with policy and politics. And I want to get all of your perspectives on why is there so much inertia? Why is the momentum so strong right now? Why is there bipartisan support to bring more CTE programming, and not just bring it into schools, but also do a better job of connecting K-12 and post-secondary and labor and the communities in a way that I think we've struggled historically, because it is relentlessly local. It is hard to bring all the parties to the table on a really regular basis and agree on what we do, and then sequence it by age group. And I'll start with, earlier this month, as we've been working with middle schools on interest inventory, middle school CTE courses, mainly career exploration. My daughter is in middle school, and the nice thing about working at Edmentum is we get to try a lot of things out with our kids, which I don't know if they love it, but I certainly love it. And she talks a lot about, she came up with this idea after she did the interest inventory, and she said, I don't think I'm quite cut out to be a fashion designer, and I really like the idea of being a lawyer, but what I'm really passionate about is being a lawyer for fashion designers in New York who are struggling. And so I want to go help the independent fashion designers protect their brands. So the question that I have is, how does an 11, now 12-year-old as of last week, come up with an idea of that? It's exposure, right? And so this idea of access, right? And this idea of like making sure we expose like this whole world of possibilities, right? And as a young child who's 11 or 12, not that she'll actually decide to do that as a living, maybe she will, and that's great. But the fact that she's even thinking that way and she gets excited about thinking that way, I think as you kind of get to the root of what everybody's talking about around like, how do we make all of this more accessible, more scalable, consistent? That is, when I think about what my daughter said in that conversation, that to me is what we're trying to at least achieve here at Edmentum. And I want to start with like the policies and the bipartisan support. What is each of your sense of why this is getting so much traction now? Like, what do you see happening in your local communities, in your states, and then nationally, because you are all operating at a national level? Why now? What are the big ticket hot items that we're really trying to address? And why do you think that we've got so much bipartisan support? And what I think will probably be funding to follow that at a state, local, and maybe even at the federal level. But like, just share your perspective with our audience of why now.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Jamie, I think, my last, when I was superintendent in Palm Beach 3.5 years ago, we had 23,000 employees. And across this nation, we're going to experience what we call the silver tsunami. So meaning we have so many people in a certain age group that are retiring at the same time, and they're taking so much institutional knowledge with them out of the workforce. And so and simultaneously, because a lot of the colleges and universities, and again, when you think about a school system, especially a large one, it's not just the teachers. I mean, you have police officers, you have bus drivers, maintenance workers, landscape. I mean, you name a job, we have it within the school system. And with so many people leaving and so much institutional knowledge leaving with them, and not a bench of people to replace them, this is a crisis for a lot of us. It's like, how are we going to adapt when we don't have the next wave of employees to move into those spaces? And because so much has changed with the air conditioning system, again, who's going to fill those roles? So I think you see such a bipartisanship is because there is a clear realization. I mean, no disrespect to anyone, but you look at most of our politicians, part of the challenge with this last election was this is a lot of older people, and who is the next wave of young people to take over these positions? And so I think at every aspect of American society, a great generation of people are all leaving at the same time. And we're all now looking at the situation saying, hey, we need to figure out how to get some of these Gen Zs and others in some of these roles and upskill them very quickly in order to avoid sort of the lapse in experience that is leaving our institutions.
Yeah, I think to build off of that, so well stated, Donald. And I think to build off of that, I think that since the pandemic, we've always known that there's been this gap between K-12 and the business community. And I think now what's happening, it's even surfaced up even more, right? So when people are criticizing the K-12 system, for example, and then business is saying, well, kids don't have A, B, and C. Like they don't, I can teach them content knowledge. I need them to teach, as Tim is aptly notified as classified as that durable skills. The reality is that since the pandemic, some people will say, well, a lot of people are leaving their jobs now because more people are being called into work full time, like in a specific location, but they want to work remotely. Well, the reality is that there are other things at play here. There are people who are unfulfilled from their career, right? And businesses know this now. So they're trying to tap into and figuring out, how do I create a system or to work primarily with a K-12 structure that actually allows better career decision making? And we know that if kids explore careers throughout their time in K through 12, there's a better chance that they're going to pursue that career that they've actually investigated, such as your daughter, and then figured out, how do we get kids more motivated? When you have kids engaged in apprenticeships and internships and career exploration, it's something like 80 or 85% of those kids actually are no longer will be considering dropping out because they don't see hope for their future. So I think that gap that we knew all along is just becoming that much more pronounced and discussed across both sides of the aisle. And I think it's important that we hone in on this energy right now, because our future, as Donald has mentioned, the future of our country depends on us establishing a really productive and proactive workforce. And I've often thought, and this is like, I don't have research to prove this, this is my bias. People start to talk about, I'm in this like mid-career slump, or I'm having a middle-age crisis in my life. Many times it results back to they didn't even think about what they were doing. Somebody led them to this pathway of, I'm an engineer, you're going to become an engineer. I'm a pharmacist, you're going to become a pharmacist. I'm an auto mechanic, that's what you're going to do, without ever stopping to think about, what do you want to do? Like, what inspires you every single day? What is your interest? And the fact that your daughter can actually combine, even at this young age, two seemingly disparate career choices, she'll begin to think about, well, maybe I want to do this and that, right? And think about that as a partnership. So to me, it's absolutely vital that we jump on this bandwagon right now and not let it go, because there's a lot of energy and synergy around it. And it may be the one thing that unites this divide that we seemingly have right now.
Thank you, Deb. Tim, what's your perspective? You have the great benefit of working nationally from an advocacy perspective. You inform a lot of policy. You spend an awful lot of time with our state education leaders and different organizations and the chamber, quite frankly. So what is your sense of this sort of bipartisan alignment? Where if there's states where you see this working particularly well, where are they? Just give us a sense of what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think what was just said, I'll build on. There's a couple of things that are happening. One, there's a sense of pragmatism. If you don't want your kids to come home and live on your couch in your basement, they're going to need these skills, and we're seeing this. And a lot of folks are saying, great, let's make sure they're learning more of those skills. It's also a little bit of motherhood and apple pie. The employers, we did a lot of research around the durable skills. We studied over 88 million job descriptions with MC Burning Glass. 8 of the top 10 most in-demand skills across 88 million job descriptions are durable skills. It's what every single employer in every industry, in every geography, and regardless of your education attainment level, want and need from any employer or for any student that's going to ultimately hit the workforce. So you look at what's doing a great job of this right now. CTE has already had the benefit of building in some of these skills much better than a lot of the other subjects. The challenge is now to make sure that you're practicing collaboration in a math class, or communication in a science class, or growth mindset while you're in history, right? Like the things we haven't always done. When I was in math class, if you were collaborating, that was cheating. Right? There was no other way to look at collaboration in math, but now you can actually have kids come together working on solving problems, presenting how they solve problems back to the class. So there's real ways to integrate this into the classroom and to transform the classroom to make sure young people are developing the skills that are in such high demand. And then I think there's this technology component too. We've actually seen a bump in the demand of durable skills since the advent of AI. It's the stuff the machines can't do.
Right.
It is collaborating, it is communicating, it is working with another human being. And when, probably many of you have probably heard the quote, I love it. It's right. AI is not going to take your job. Somebody else who can use AI better than you can is going to take your job. And so it still needs that human element. And this works, ultimately, very long-winded answer, but this works with policymakers, this works with parents, this works for employers. This got this universal appeal at a time where not much does. And so it's a really great spot to capitalize on some of the momentum that we have in our schools. Indiana is doing a great job of this. Utah is doing a good job of this. North Carolina is doing a good job of this. A lot of these point back to their portraits of a graduate and those states bringing that portrait to life and saying, all right, we're going to transform what the student's day looks like so that they're developing these skills throughout the entire day, not just for one class, and certainly not as a Carnegie unit, right? This is not, you don't think critically from 11 to 11:50 and then go to science. You've got to think critically all day long. And so that's where we're starting to see the real change come into this as well. But it's that universal demand that I think is both pushing and pulling that the opportunity.
It's really good feedback. And so I want to talk about, I heard you all talk about evolution and preparation in your own way. And so, when we think about K-12, most of our nearly all of our executive leaders in K-12, so when I say executive leader, I mean superintendents, the cabinets, those heads of schools, those running the systems, almost all of them started out, at least for a short period, as a teacher, as a classroom teacher, and then progressively moved into, building leadership and up and up and up and up. In many cases, move into the superintendency, and in many cases, move on to work at the state education level. But at every step of the way, there is a foundational program. So in your undergraduate program and your master's program and all of your certification programs that you pursue as an educator and then as an education leader, and I went through many of those myself, nowhere in that programming do we sit down and learn how to build CTE programming or incorporate durable skills. We talk about the critical nature of having the right literacy programs, instructional model. We talk about the critical nature of having the right mathematics programs and instructional models, and so on and so forth. We don't sit down and talk about all these other things that we need to wrap around to ensure that we've got a very robust system of instruction, what we're focused on, how we focus on it. And so when you think about implementing these programs, right, so the first step is actually getting really good traction right now across the country, which is what we've been talking about, which is policy. And so what we know about education, especially K-12 education, is policy is going to inform innovation and strategy. It just will. So when you start to make changes like a portrait of a graduate, a framework of a graduate, you start to make changes around what it means to get your high school diploma. Those requirements trickle down into then what we see our school systems executing. And so we're in the early stages of this, and we have states like Tim, you said, you've got Indiana, you've got Utah, you've got North Carolina and others that are really progressing and making very good strides and very, very focused. And what you'll see, like in states like Indiana, very good connection points between the state legislature, the state system, local SKU communities, the chambers of commerce, workforce. Like there is very much a united front, and that takes a lot of work and time to get that going. What advice do you all have? So when you think about from a teacher perspective, and Tim would love to have you comment on what ASU is doing, but from a teacher perspective up through the leaders of these systems, how do you think through, plan, and execute bringing programs like this into your school systems? So what does it take? What have you seen working really well that can be replicated? This is the number one question I get when I'm out meeting with superintendents across the country right now, and we're talking a lot about the career learning programs and solutions that we provide at Edmentum. The number one question that I get when I'm talking to system leaders is, where else in the country do you see a very full program that is being implemented, executed at scale, consistency with, unilateral adoption and community support. And I've got a handful of places that I point people to, but we need many more. So I want to open this up to what's working, where is it working, and what advice do you have for those that are on the call today that really want to understand, okay, this is great in theory, but how do we bring it into practice? Who'd like to start?
Let me just jump in from a broader perspective. One of the things that I've seen really exciting, and then a need that we have as well. One of the things I've seen really exciting is when people actually take their mission statement of their school district and or the profile of the graduate and actually enact it and share out about it. And I'm saying that because very often we'll have a superintendent who gives a state of the school's address, right? Or a principal giving one about their building, particularly at the high school level. But what they always focus on is what are the test scores. And I was really excited when I was watching this one superintendent on the west side of Cleveland. He actually developed a whole a district report card, if you will, based on everything else other than test scores, because that was what was important. And they took their portrait of a graduate. So it'll say very often in a portrait of a graduate, it'll say something about being like a productive citizen. Well, who reports out on that? And what does that look like operationalized within a school? So he actually was talking about career readiness, for example, and they had decided to get every kid a laptop so that they can do digital portfolios. Well, that's what he reports out on. He's like, people can read the math and reading language arts scores that are actually printed in the newspaper. What I want people to see is how are we enacting that portrait of a graduate at every single grade level? And what that does is it gets rid of the first grade teacher who may say, well, that has nothing to do with me. I'm just teaching kids reading. I don't care about their career. So he has permeated it down to have the scope and sequence about what does collaboration look like in first grade versus what it looks like in eighth grade, or how can it be operationalized in every content area in the high school level. What you, Jamie, I can point to certain people who are doing that. What we really need now is to create a robust network where anybody on this webinar can actually click on and see, oh, what I'm interested in what they're doing in K-5, or what I'm interested in what they're doing in biology, so that we have much more sharing across our country about practices that work and even what doesn't work. Because when a school system sets out to do this, what doesn't work is equally important. So you don't just give up on it, but you think like, oh, wow, Donald School District, they started out doing this, it didn't work. So let me avoid that and let me jump over and let me find out how they solve that problem as well. So I think it's really, really critical to figure out how do you do that, but also to look at that as a marker on your graduate profile and figure out how are we reporting it? And even more importantly, how are we operationalizing that from K through 12?
It's really good.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please, Tim.
I would build on that as well. I love these portraits of a graduate. They are a North Star, and I have not seen anything as powerful in a while in the education space of saying the community has come together and we've decided what we want young people to know or do by the time they leave here. Once you have a goal that has such broad agreement, it's time to build a system that will get people to look like that. So
Amen.
there's a lot of there is a lot of wind in our sails as it relates to that. We are working with Mary Lou Fulton Teacher College out of Arizona State University on teacher prep programs that help teachers learn how to embed durable skills into their teaching class. And so we've not asked that of the system. And so I know we have asked so much of our teachers and we keep piling more and more on. I do believe that this is not more, it's just different. Ask students to get together in a group to solve a set of problems using different problem-solving techniques and presenting back to their classroom embeds multiple durable skills in the classroom while you still teach the same curriculum you've always been teaching. So these slight tweaks to the student's day are so powerful. And I would say one thing about what's happening in career tech that I think is also a bright spot across the country. They have been sort of embedding what employers are asking for that young people should be able to know or do for a lot of years. What we're hearing from a lot of folks is whether it's their culinary program or their advanced manufacturing or whatever this is, as they're getting ready to graduate students, the employers are saying to them, I'll take your worst chef with durable skills over your best chef without durable skills. And we've all heard an employer say, give me somebody who's got these skills and I'll teach them what I need to know. Nobody ever says the opposite. Nobody ever says, give me a great chef who's awful at durable skills and I'll bring them into my kitchen where they're going to cause all kinds of disruption and they can't communicate. Just doesn't happen. So I think that it's becoming clear sort of, and CTE is a shining star of this, of how we get kids to leave with a combination of technical and durable. And I love where CTE is in the space right now as an example to a lot of others.
Great. Donna, what's your perspective?
I think the only thing I would add in addition to that, those great comments, is there's two sort of micro examples that we did in both Atlanta and Fulton County and in Palm Beach. So for a lot of teachers, we work with business and industry to make sure that we selected a group of teachers every summer to do externships. So they actually worked and were embedded within different businesses and industries that are unique to our community. So they could then learn what it was that they wanted students to ultimately find themselves in down the line. And two things it did for the teacher. It helped them think differently about teaching their classrooms, but they have firsthand information and knowledge of what business and industry were dealing with new employees. And so that was very successful and it became highly competitive. I really wish it would have scaled more, but that was one example. But because of that externship opportunity, the next thing I did is I went to the business community and philanthropy and said, hey, I have 13 divisions within the school system. Now, this is probably something unique to a large school system, but we hired almost 1,000 kids every year to internship within the summer in our different offices, from the superintendent suite, the law offices, the food transportation, food service, maintenance, police. And so it was a competitive process where students had to apply. They were paid. So they had to come to work on time. We brought in the banks to teach kids to open bank accounts, to have sort of financial literacy classes associated with that. But then they also had to go through an evaluation cycle. So every month they would have to sit with an adult to give them critical feedback. And then they would take a class in the later evenings on how to receive feedback, which is a skill a lot of us overlook because a lot of people don't take feedback very well. And so I think there was this whole process of thinking about this large system, which in our case, I tell people all the time, schools are nothing more than a microcosm of American society. So since it was this big infrastructure and you put kids into that position to learn, to be guided, to be mentored, but also to get paid, made a big difference in how that worked. And we had some kids that were unfortunately terminated because they weren't coming to work on time or they didn't complete certain tasks and assignments. But it sent a message to the other students that this is how the real world is actually played. And so then you also saw other kids really step up their game, especially as the years progressed, because they really wanted that experience and that opportunity to be in the law offices of school district of Palm Beach County and understand how we dealt with legal cases, or we dealt with policy, or we dealt with memorandums of understanding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Donald, how do you make that? And I'd be curious what others think too. That the models that you just talked about are very interesting. I think they're needed in every system across this country. I think to your point, being in a larger system where maybe you had some of the resources or just the groups or kind of the consensus around making these types of programs and opportunities happen. How do we make that more repeatable? And I don't want to keep saying scale because I don't necessarily mean, we know right now, especially under this current administration, state-based focused educational initiatives, policies, programming, all of those things are what we're dealing with and the way in which we're operating and will continue to operate. But how do we make something that you found successful in Fulton, Palm Beach, how do we make that more repeatable for other systems? Like what have we seen in terms of, and you talked about the network, Deb, but what does that actually look like? Like how do we bring something like that to life where one community can learn from another that might be on the other sides of the country, but the needs of the community, right? So we talk about welding, we talk about all these different professions we want to prepare students for. How do we make these things more repeatable so that others can leverage them and get them? We have so many things we're focusing on within our school systems. How do we make these a little bit easier to implement? What perspectives do we have on that? And we're all quiet because we're trying to figure it out. Yes, go, Tim.
This is not easy. I will say one thing right off the bat, right? That every community believes they are a very special snowflake, and so it couldn't possibly work in one community as well as our community, right? So we're seeing great examples of it, and then we want to transform it for the that is not the reality. The employers, what they're looking for is highly consistent across the country in every industry. It's unbelievable how much we want to think that it is very different locally. And I think that that's a big challenge. So I would say one of the biggest things that's out there is just the want to. The how to is probably not as hard.
Yep. So the want to. This is a little bit of a loaded question just to follow up on the want to. So we're living at a time right now where NAEP scores were underperforming, so we still have not recovered to pre-pandemic levels, related to literacy and mathematics. We know that chronic absenteeism across the country is still much higher for the most part than pre-pandemic. We always had an issue with it. Now it is, continuing to run at rates that are much higher than pre-pandemic levels. And we know that kids are struggling. We know that they're looking for engagement in ways that we're having a hard time replicating. We know that we continue in pockets to have challenges in terms of the number of teachers that we have supporting students within our systems, and I could go on and on and on. So I've talked to a few folks across the country who say, why are we focusing on career learning right now when we got to get back to the basics? I hear this quite a bit. So when we're trying to improve literacy rates, when we're trying to get us to just a basic foundational mathematics and improvement in terms of post and pre-pandemic rates, trying to get back to stronger NAEP scores in terms of the progression of improvement. And so why are we now talking about bringing yet another thing into our system with this career learning? And what happened to us just focusing on wanting to get every student in this country into a college and or university? What do y'all say to that in terms of the, is it an or, is it an and? Why are we trying to focus on too much? Should we be getting back to the quote unquote basics? And why is it so important from your perspective? We either do that or we don't do that, and why?
I think it's a both and. I think you should have a skill and an opportunity to go further your education. I mean, I think there's never been a greater moment in time where an education can be personalized, right? And so giving a child a reason to pick up those skills and to improve those NAEP scores. I think if anything, what I've experienced in my career around career connected learning is when I have a clear focus, then it makes sense to me. And I think the challenge for a lot of school systems is to take some of those core subject areas and align it to that focus. So not always, in my high school at Philip O'Berry, again, like I said earlier, we didn't teach Beowulf in those classes. They taught things around technical writing, blueprint drafting, and the medical. Like everything was aligned to what their coursework, their ultimate career job, choices were. And I think back then we had to sit down on the weekends and figure all that out and have these. But now with technology and some of the tools out there, we can shift and create examples that are much better aligned to the potential choices that the kids are choosing for themselves. And if we do it early enough, again, like we said earlier, in middle school and some of those areas, now you have a runway of time. Like I'm telling you, with my own child, when that boy decided that he wanted to do marine biology, everything is aligned to that now. His math classes, and because of the high school that he's in, they align it all to that program of study. So all of his research projects, and whether it's an English class, whether it's a history class, it's around understanding that field better. So then when he goes out into the world and starts scuba diving out there with the fish, he understands the history of scuba diving. He understands why conservation is important. He's writing papers on those things. So there's an alignment that forces him to then go find other resources. So he's reading a lot more, but he is reading a lot on what he's interested in, but he's finding those connections across the board.
Yeah, one of the things I think we've painted ourselves too much into a corner with, I couldn't agree with you more, Donald, is this or and, right? And if you think about it early on, I mean, whole language or phonics, and now we realize like it's a blending of both and has to work, right? Inclusion or everything surrounds itself with this and. When you think about, just take literacy, for example, I've seen incredible folks doing work where tapping into, so I'm not saying your son is not a good reader, but let's just say Donald's son was not a great reader, but he wanted to really get into marine biology. helping him to understand to read the nonfiction work that's affiliated with marine biology. That's where the and comes in.
Yep.
Kids will jump into things in which they're truly engaged. And kids get so excited because they want to learn more. But there's also kids now who want to make choices. So when somebody says, you've got to read this book, you've got to do this math example, you got to do this science experiment, they're not finding pleasure and purpose in that. Where you find pleasure and purpose is when you self-select out, what is it that my learning's going to be about? And we give kids agency. We give them agency to make these choices. That's where, if you really examine scores and things, kids' scores go up when they're engaged, when they have a choice. So if we go back to the reasons why perhaps scores are not where we want to, let's look behind that to figure out where are scores learning. And I go back to how often we engage our community in the development of the graduate profile. Well, then it sits on a shelf like a strategic plan. Let's energize that profile and say, okay, what do we need to have our kids meet all of the things that we have, all of those attributes we have in that profile? Then you operationalize it and bring to bear on it. Well, if kids are going to be doing A, then we need to get them engaged more. We need businesses within our schools. I mean, I get so energized around this conversation because I think, Tim, you might have said it's a challenge. It's not that difficult to figure out. It's just a challenge to implement, but we have to have the will to do it in an and kind of way.
That's right.
Yeah, there's nothing like relevancy to get kids to want to do something, right? I mean, so just great answers on that front. There's no such thing as career connected learning without basic literacy and numeracy. I don't understand why. What's the debate?
Amen.
Yep, no debate. So I'm going to ask you all one more question I want you to think about. So I'm going to give you the question to think about, and then I just want to talk about some experiences that we had earlier this year. We survey students, and we're trying to figure out some of the chronic absenteeism issues and how to align programming to student interest and engagement. You can find a lot of it on our website under research. We've done some pretty interesting studies of improved graduation rates, lowering the absenteeism rates. But the last thing I want you to think about, and I'll come back to the question, I'll give you a few seconds to think about it, is what are you reading? What did you see? Where do you see really good either research, implementation, case studies of where you see CTE, career learning, durable skills, and focusing on the core fundamentals, literacy, numeracy? What are some either research you've read that you want to point people to, case studies you've seen, or specific communities that you want to point to? Because I think everybody likes to leave saying, like, where can I get more practical information on this? So I'm going to come back to you on that. And it can be as simple as go look at this state or this district if that's what you think is the right thing to recommend. And I just want to share, so earlier this year, we were surveying students, and oftentimes after we do these surveys and we go out and I was observing our team talking with some students. We actually were in a district, I won't say where it was, but really, really significant chronic absenteeism rates post-pandemic. And there was a handful of students that were in this focus group, and a couple of the students were like one day from being expelled. They had missed so much school. This was a public school district, had tried everything, and these students were at a point where the district had said, we don't know what to do anymore. You've missed more school than we can accept. And those students were tagged to be offered a new set of CTE courses, and they got really interested and this one individual got really interested in forensic science. Forensic science led to criminal justice and an interest in being an investigator. And we sat down and we asked him, why are you going to school again? And his comment was, I felt so helpless. I felt alone. I felt like I was struggling in all these other courses. And then I got to take this forensic science course. And I got so interested in this course that then led me to learning more through this career exploration course that I took, that I think I really want to pursue criminal justice. And the only way I can do that is I have to graduate high school. And so the way I'm going to graduate high school is I'm going to get my grades up. And, there was a few areas that this individual was failing and struggling, but was so focused now on wanting to do this because they found passion and they found engagement and they felt like they belonged now in that school setting, whereas before they didn't feel like they belonged. And that was really inspiring. And that was like one example. And we heard a whole group of kids talking about how they felt this new energy and zest for coming to school because they were taking these other courses. And what it fed into is they were reading more, right? They were attending, they were going to all their other classes because they couldn't do these, fun classes unless they were going to all their core classes. It was just really interesting to see that happening within that school system that really was struggling pretty significantly. So I share that as one really, really practical example. Now my question is, with the few minutes that we have left, what are you reading? What are you seeing? What do you want to point people to as a good next step in terms of how others can explore this and as it relates to durable skills, incorporating that into the K-12 system, as it relates to the CTE and career learning programs, bringing workplace learning to life? What recommendations do you have? Who would like to start?
I think I could probably go on and on. I'm sure all of us could. A couple that come to mind is just when you do Google searches or whatever, the Link Learning Program. I actually had chills up my back when I was at the department and I went to visit in the valleys of California. Kids who probably had little hope and didn't have a lot of great examples around them of experiences that they could engage in to really think about careers. And Link Learning, these kids just were amazing to me as far as their research on careers and where they wanted to. I'm moved by some of Anthony Carnevale's work at Georgetown University. I think it's if I'm blanking on it correctly, or not blanking on it, it's on Center in Education and Workforce. Yep. And he really bridges the gap between, he believes that there's no relationship between K through 12 in today's occupations, and feels that we push too much into post-secondary system instead of in the K through 12 system. So he has done a lot of research in this area and really provides a lot of really good examples of making these connections and also the benefits of it. So when we go back to that whole, how do you go to the community and say, what about reading, writing, and arithmetic, but we have this career-connected learning? He fuses that in a way that I think is really beneficial. And I'm sure we have a lot of other examples to provide, but just really providing those tried and true topics and again, operationalizing that graduate profile.
Great. Thank you, Deb. We've got time for one more between Tim and Donald, because I know Ross wants to close us out here. So between the two of you, who's got one more thing they want to add before we close out?
Go ahead, Tim.
I'll do a very quick one and there'd be time for Donald. I would shout out the CAPS network. I think what they're doing is really impressive. I've also seen a career-corrected learning high school where you went to an engineering, let's say this one happened to be an engineering school. And in English, they were reading Julius Caesar. In history, they were studying the Roman Empire. And in their engineering class, they had to build a bridge across a river within the Roman Empire using period materials and describe how it affected trade and transportation and migration routes. I mean, that was the kids' day. I mean, when I share that story with folks, they're just like, wow, I wish I'd had that.
Yeah. Highly integrated. That's great. All right, Ross, do you want to close us out here?
We do have time for Donald.
Donald, we got one. We got one plug.
Yeah, the new CTE by the Association of Career and Technical Education. I would read that as it talks about enhancing student achievement and post-secondary success. And I have to piggyback on what Tim said. Schools like my old high school, Philip O'Berry Academy of Technology in Charlotte, North Carolina, we had a partnership with NASCAR. So to watch kids in those automotive classes actually start replicating what a NASCAR team actually does, and then do that with radio controlled cars within the school system. So marketing, the catering, like everything around that made a lot of sense. And unfortunately for our boys, our girls would kick their butts every year. But it was always a good time. But I think having that sort of connecting us to the real world was always exciting.
It's wonderful. Thank you. Ross, over to you.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm sitting here thinking rarely has a group of people been so disappointed to see me, because it means that the panel is concluding. But we do have another webinar coming up, so I want to put this up. Folks, if you want to attend our webinar next week, we will be talking career-connected learning further. I'll also switch to another slide where we have this link written out, and you'll get this via email. So if you don't get it here, you'll get it there. But we have... trying to click. Okay. Yep. So that webinar will be next Tuesday at 3 East. It is going to talk more about this exploration of exploration to employability. It will cover more about our Edmentum career offering and some of what that provides to grades 6 to 12 students. So you can see the link there to register. We'll send that via email. Also, a couple other resources here. We have an op-ed that Jamie recently had published all about this topic as well as our Edmentum career page if you're interested in learning more about that offering. I also want to thank all of you who did send in some questions. We didn't have time to get to them today, but we did capture them, and we'll find different ways to get you some responses to those. I have captured all of those in our doc, so no worries there. But most importantly, I want to thank all of our panelists, Tim, Donald, and Deb and Jamie for moderating. We really appreciate you all being here. It was a really insightful conversation. So really glad we did this.
Thank you all. Great conversation. And thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great
Thank
day.
you. Thanks.
Thank you.